Over the last 5 days, a former Tory MP has been convicted of sexual assault. An unnamed ex-Tory minister has been arrested, and Prince Andrew faces a wave of new allegations about his part in Jeffrey Epstein's sexual abuse. All the men involved have one thing in common: they have been protected by our establishment. That's our main story for tonight. I'll be discussing that with Aaron Bastani. How are you doing, Aaron?
I'm very well, Michael. I'm very well. Thank you for asking. Had a lovely weekend. Great weather.
And we're also going to be speaking, well, I spoke earlier to the FT's Deputy Beijing Bureau Chief, Yuan, about Trump's TikTok ban. That's a great interview. Look forward to that. And then at the end of the show, we're going to be discussing the SAS's rogue killing squad. That was a brilliant story in the Sunday Times yesterday. We're going to be speaking about that to Declassified's Phil Miller, both the details of that story and sort of the wider significance of it, how it relates to British foreign policy in general. As ever, share the show link. We want to get more people watching this live. On Saturday, a Tory ex-minister was arrested after being accused of rape and sexual assault by a woman in her mid-20s. The woman in question was working as a parliamentary aide. The MP remains unnamed. We'll go into some detail in a bit later about why that remains the case. But of course, for now, it's too early to speculate on the person's guilt or otherwise. But the Tories are under quite a lot of pressure about how they have dealt with this up to now. So the chief whip had known about the accusation for 4 months. Obviously, the arrest happened only on this weekend, but the chief whip was aware for 4 months and has apparently done very little. So this was written up by the Telegraph on the weekend, and we can go to a few quotes from that article now. So the Telegraph has established that the woman who was working as a parliamentary aide made a complaint to Mr. Spencer on April 1st, but says she became frustrated when nothing was done and sought a second meeting with him, which she says he declined. She also alleges that she told Mr. Spencer, the man in charge of party discipline, that the MP issued threats against her if she spoke to anybody, but that Mr. Spencer simply reassured her that the MP in question would not carry out his threat. So, I mean, comes across as completely useless, serious allegations, and she's of the impression that the chief whip is not taking these seriously at all. He's obviously still the chief whip. It's worth getting up this because the allegations are really serious. So this is from that same article. On Sunday, Scotland Yard confirmed that it had received allegations relating to 4 separate incidents involving allegations of sexual offences and assault alleged to have occurred at addresses in Westminster, Lambeth and Hackney between July 2019 and January 2020. The alleged victim has claimed one of the alleged assaults left her needing hospital treatment. Now, given the seriousness of these allegations, the Conservatives are being asked, they're under pressure to explain why they have not suspended this MP. So why did they not suspend him 4 months ago when this person first came along with these allegations? They could have suspended him whilst he was under investigation. And now why they haven't suspended him, now he has been arrested. That question was put to Nadeem Zahawi, so he's a Tory frontbencher, by Neil Patterson this morning on Sky. Let's take a look.
Last week, we heard from the Director of Public Prosecutions that just 1.4% of rape cases ended with a successful prosecution. Why has the MP who has been accused of rape not been suspended? Why has the whip not been withdrawn?
Well, these are very serious allegations, Neil. There's a police investigation. I don't know the details of that investigation. There's a victim here as well. I think it's right for us to wait until the police conclude their investigation, and then you'll be hearing from the chief whip as to what action will be taken. It's a very, very serious...
Why are we waiting until the conclusion of the police investigation? I'm trying to think of any other place in the public sector. You know, a doctor, if he'd been accused of rape, would not be back on the wards. A teacher would not be back in the classroom. A policeman would not be back on the beat. So why is a parliamentarian still a member of the party?
Well, as I said, these are very serious allegations. I don't want to speculate on those. Sometimes we find out when the police will report on this why a particular path has been chosen. All I would say to your viewers is that there is a police investigation. It's right that they are able to conclude their investigation, and then you'll be hearing from the chief whip as to what course of action.
Well, I'm not asking about the facts of the case. Just tell me one profession in which an individual would not be immediately suspended, which does not necessarily cast aspersions on them. It's not a qualification of them being innocent or guilty. Name me one other profession in which this would happen.
I don't want to, on this programme, speculate
You can.
the details, because I don't have, no, Neil, because it's wrong to do so, because sometimes when the details emerge, people go, now I understand why. And I think that's completely wrong. There's a very serious allegation being made. There's a police investigation. Let's have that investigation be concluded, and then up to the Chief Whip to make sure that the right action is taken, and you'll be hearing from the Chief Whip on that action.
That was obviously a very good interview there. Nadeem Zahawi had no answer whatsoever to the question of what other profession would it be normal that you can get arrested for suspected sexual assault and keep your job, especially if it's a high-profile job with a lot of responsibility. He didn't have an answer to that question. There are two parts, though, of that interview that I do want to focus on a bit more, and they are the sort of ideas, the tropes that Nadeem Zahawi was pointing to try and evade responsibility from the Conservative Party. And the first one was to say, this is a really serious offence. It's so serious, the police are dealing with it, and so, it's beyond our control. It's so serious, we wouldn't want to get involved. Now, that's a weak argument anyway. I don't think the police are suggesting that if the Conservatives were to discipline an MP, that would affect their ability to proceed with an investigation. But it also does not in any way gel with what the alleged victim has said about how the Conservatives have approached this issue so far. So again, we could go to this is in the Times now. So of her meeting with the Chief Whip on April the 1st, the woman making the allegation said, he never suggested I should go to the police. In fact, I asked him when he would withdraw the whip. He first said he had a police report, then changed it to a charge. Then he ultimately said he'd need a conviction. I felt like he did not take me seriously or recognize the severity of what had happened. So you've got two issues there. One, he didn't say go to the police. He wasn't saying, these allegations are so serious. This is too serious for the Conservative Party. You'll have to go to law enforcement. And I think the really interesting thing there is the way the goalposts are moving. So first of all, he's saying, I'll withdraw the whip when a police report happens. Then he'll withdraw the whip when there's a charge, then when there's a conviction. So the goalposts keep moving. They're obviously very reluctant to remove the whip from this man. Another sort of trope he played on, he's saying, so serious, there's a victim, we've got to think of the victim here. And he's implying there that by not suspending the MP, they're keeping her well-being in mind. And people have made arguments like this. People have said, if they were to suspend him, then it would become public who he was, and then people would be able to find some sort of paper trail or speculate on who the victim was. And she has an absolute right to anonymity, both morally, obviously, and in the law. What this doesn't gel with is the fact that they had 4 months to do this. They could have suspended this man back then without really revealing anything about the case, just that there was an alleged sexual assault. They wouldn't have to have, revealed that it was a Westminster aide. They could have very easily kept the alleged victim anonymous. But also, probably more important, newspapers are being told that the alleged victim is really angry the whip hasn't been removed. So Nadeem Zahawi is going on TV, asked why the whip hasn't been removed, and he's sort of using the alleged victim as a shield to say, we have to think about the victims. She's pissed off that you haven't suspended this guy, right? So it's completely, well, I'd say incoherent, but it is coherent. It's just cynical. Let's have a look at this issue of why the media won't name him. This is, again, I think Nadeem Zahawi, completely unreasonable, completely hollow, completely cynical. The question of why the media won't name this particular MP, even though I presume a bunch of them know who it is. I mean, I'm not in the kind of circles where I find this out, but I presume that many of these journalists and editors know the name of this MP, but they've decided not to mention him. This is the BBC's explanation for why we still don't know the name of this MP. So they write, firstly, an alleged victim has automatic right under statute to lifelong anonymity. That right can only be waived in writing by the victim. The media must therefore be careful not to add a jigsaw identification, and so must limit publishing any details which could help identify the alleged victim. And then secondly, there are also strong privacy reasons for not naming. Cliff Richard's 2018 legal action against the BBC and later cases established that individuals under investigation by the state have a reasonable expectation of privacy in relation to the fact of an investigation and its details up until they are charged. So the BBC got burned a while ago when they, I suppose partly they went a bit overboard. They sent a helicopter to Cliff Richard's house, and when he was being questioned by police, he in the end wasn't even arrested. So the judge decided that was overboard. That was an invasion of his privacy, which went beyond what it's reasonable to do. So it's not in any way illegal to report on someone who hasn't yet been charged, but it's now in this grey area because of that particular ruling. We're going to go on to some more cases in a moment. Aaron, what do you make of all of this?
Yeah, I think the drawing a sort of analog between what's going on here and what happened with Cliff Richards is deeply misleading. Like you say, Cliff, there was a live helicopter feed at great expense, the licensee there of his arrest. And I think what's really important, it's something that wasn't brought out during that interview, is there needs to be a clarification quite urgently as to what would constitute the threshold, which would mean that this MP loses the whip. It's clearly not arrest. It's clearly not police bail. I assume he's on police bail, given he was arrested and he's on police bail. There'll be certain conditions to that, most likely. There may not be, but it's highly likely there would be. And then, of course, charged and ultimately found guilty. Now, if it is that they will not take the whip away from him until he is found guilty of what would ultimately, he or she, I mean, it's a he, isn't it, of what is a very, very serious violent crime, they're really, and this has to be really compounded here, there is absolutely no comparison for that in any other job in public life. I think the second he's charged, he absolutely has to lose the whip. I think police bail, I think it's a bit of a grey area. I think once he's charged, he has to lose the whip. And if it goes all the way through to actually, being found guilty or not, I think that is just outrageous. That really would show to the public. MPs are treated, particularly Tory MPs, are treated utterly exceptionally compared to the rest of the population at large.
Yeah, true. And the Tories have form on this. So you might be thinking, look, innocent until proven guilty. There are obviously some good arguments as to why. I think on the balance of good arguments and bad arguments, probably it is right that you don't have a right to anonymity, at any point actually in the trial. But the Tories don't seem to be acting according to a desire to follow due process. And to sort of make that argument, I'm going to go to a couple of cases from the past. So again, this is very recent news. So Charlie Elphicke was a Tory MP alleged to have sexually assaulted someone. He was found guilty last Thursday of 3 counts of sexual assault against 2 women. He'll be sentenced later in the year. Now, how did the Conservatives handle the Elphicke case? This can be a bit of a test case. How do they deal with sexual assault? Do they take it seriously? Are they really concerned with due process and that's what guides their behavior? Or are they just, doing incredibly cynical political management? And this example will tell you it was the latter, because Elphicke lost the whip in 2017 when the allegations were referred to the police, but he was reinstated in December 2018 before a vote of no confidence in the then Prime Minister Theresa May. Right? So this was party management, pure and simple. These are not people who care about, being innocent until you're proven guilty. These are people who, as you saw with the Dominic Cummings case, are willing to, completely admit they have no morals because they're just confident the news story is going to move on. And what they care about is winning some votes and ultimately getting their agenda through, whatever it might be. But The Guardian revealed actually some more details about this case. So that's already disgusting enough. What The Guardian revealed today was a cabinet minister lobbied the Prime Minister to help Charlie Elphicke after the Conservative MP was charged with sexual assault. This was after the charge. And again, they don't name the cabinet minister in question. But the part of that article which I found most notable was this. So they write, The Guardian has also been told of deep unease among some Conservative MPs, particularly women, at the reaction from male Tory MPs when Elphicke and Andrew Griffiths, a colleague who had the party whip removed after being accused of sexually inappropriate conduct, were welcomed back into the fold. There was a lot of thumping of tables with fists, and I remember just looking across at another woman with a frozen look, said one Conservative who was in attendance at a meeting of the influential 1922 Committee of Tory MPs in December 2018. So you've got someone who's charged with sexual assault. This isn't just something that's appeared in a newspaper or that some allegation has been made. This has to be taken seriously. He's ultimately found guilty, and they're banging tables when he's reinstated in the party purely so that Theresa May can win a vote of no confidence. One more. This is the last one I'm going to do from the Conservative Party, just because I think, again, all of this is just evidence that this party do not give a shit about sexual assault, and they're completely guided by cynicism when it comes to these things. So we talked about this on a recent show. This is Rob Roberts, MP. He also hasn't been suspended. I think they might have an investigation pending, but as we spoke about on that show, they don't need one because the facts are out in the open for everyone to read. So he was not suspended after sending unsolicited lewd messages to a 21-year-old staffer. Let's get these up quickly. Appalling. So Rob Roberts is the MP, the intern, 21-year-old. Just thought we could have some fun, maybe. No strings. I might be gay, but I enjoy fun times. Come on, don't cry now. You'll make me sad. Please, happy thoughts. Want me to leave you alone? And then she says, and this track looks, harrowing, really. Sorry, not you. I'm just in an awful state at the moment. Really bad mental health day. And then he replies to this. She's just said, I'm having a bad mental health day. I was just thinking about fun times. Maybe if you thought of them too, it might help you. Now, this is a man who is in charge of, he has a great deal of responsibility. If she's a young 21-year-old aide, then he has a lot of power and authority over the advancement of her career. And the Conservatives seem to have decided that this is an acceptable way for a Conservative MP to behave. And you can say, oh, it's innocent until proven guilty. No one's said this is, a fake screenshot. This is real. Everyone's admitted it's real, and they've decided, it's still not enough. And finally, just in case you thought, maybe the bar's really high for losing the Conservative whip. Maybe they think that, it was members who selected these MPs, and then it was the electorate who elected them at the last general election. To get rid of them, we'd have to have some, they'd have had to have killed someone live on camera. Again, not the case. Julian Lewis had the whip withdrawn for standing for the post of chairman of the Intelligence and Security Committee. I think that took about an hour. So this is someone who did something which is completely legitimate, is to stand for a position in a committee. It was going against the Prime Minister's preferred candidate, and they removed the whip. So being arrested for alleged sexual assault, fine, you get to remain a Tory MP. Messaging your 21-year-old interns when they're having a bad mental health day that you want to fool around with them and maybe it will make them feel better, that's completely acceptable. But if you stand against the Prime Minister's candidate to chair a committee, no, that's a red light. That's going overboard there. Aaron.
Are you a football fan, Michael?
No, I'm afraid not.
Well, Sir Alex Ferguson, the most successful manager in British football, measured a number of ways, not every way, but a number of ways. He had a thing where he would try and get a player married as quickly as possible. Now, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. But the logic was he wanted his team, his players, to be focusing on their football. He didn't want them in nightclubs. He wanted them to have quite a settled home life. Now, I'm not here to ascribe to somebody how they should or shouldn't live their life. But clearly, if somebody's a representative for about 70,000 constituents, if they're participating in a government, they should be, doing better things with their mental bandwidth, their time, their energies than what this is, which is harassing a 21-year-old young woman who's going through a tough time. You shouldn't be doing that. You shouldn't be doing that as an MP. It's deeply troubling. You have the completely wrong mindset, the completely wrong priorities, and the Conservative Party, by tacitly permitting you to do that, show they're deeply unserious about actually governing the country in a way that helps most working people. And so it's just a snapshot, really, of how deeply unprofessional, ridiculous, and absurd our political class are. We've talked about, in a bunch of other professions, you couldn't do this, doctor, teacher, professor. In no job can you do this. In no job can you get away with it. I mean, plenty of people do it, but don't get found out. But in no job is it viewed as okay, permissible, to be sending messages like that to a 21-year-old woman. I mean, it's just absurd. And conservatives, the whole point of 20th, 19th century conservatism, particularly in Europe, but also in this country, family, nation, church, these traditional values. I don't buy it. It's not my value set. I'm not a small c conservative. But you just wonder, how untethered have they become from the kind of intellectual foundations upon which their political tradition rests, and therefore, what do they believe in? What are they in politics for? If it's not tradition, if it's not the family and all these things they profess to adore and want to uphold in society at large, well, we all know what the answer is. It's power, it's self-enrichment, it's status. And that's deeply, deeply troubling. But the fact that there's no, at least public effort to at least appear to be dealing with it is perhaps the worst part of all.
And we've got 2,000 watching. Hit the like button. And we've got a tweet on the hashtag from Rich O'Shea. A female Conservative MP shocked that male Conservative MPs banged fists on table when welcoming Charlie Elphicke back into the fold. Why are those female Conservative MPs surprised exactly? Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know. I don't really go in for that kind of thing. I feel like you, as a female Conservative MP, you still have the right to be annoyed when your male colleagues show complete disregard for, well, they're not alleged victims of sexual abuse. Now they are victims of sexual abuse because the court case has happened. So I prefer not to go down that angle of sort of like, well, you can't complain because you're a Tory MP. Obviously, I fundamentally disagree with the worldview of all of these people, but I think anyone, especially any woman, has an absolute right to complain when their colleagues are being, appalling. And there's a £5 super chat from Liz Taylor. Keep up the good work, guys. Looking forward to seeing the delightful Ash very soon. A joy to listen to. Yes, Ash will be back next Monday. She's been having a very well-deserved holiday. But, I can imagine you are all missing her dearly from your Monday evenings. Don't worry, there is not long to wait. Next story. Last Friday, court documents were unsealed relating to a defamation case between Ghislaine Maxwell and Virginia Giuffre, which originally took place in 2015. That was when the defamation case happened. Now the court documents have been unsealed. So in that civil case, Giuffre accused Maxwell of years of sexual abuse, trafficking her to rich and powerful men and keeping her as a sex slave from 1999 to 2002 when she escaped to Australia. Really horrific stuff. She is one of the prominent characters in the Netflix documentary, which, as we spoke about on the conversation with TrueAnon, doesn't necessarily give you all the information about what's really going on, but does actually have some very powerful and important interviews with the victims. So it is worth watching. But yeah, so these papers have been revealed, and we are now finding out more allegations. Again, this isn't a court ruling, so we don't know that what's said here is 100% true. But it was said under oath, as far as I know. I'm pretty sure that's the case. And let's read some of them because it relates to Prince Andrew. Perhaps even more important to her role in Epstein's sexual abuse ring, Maxwell had direct connections to other powerful individuals with whom she could connect Epstein. One such powerful individual Epstein forced Jane Doe No. 3 to have sexual relations with was a member of the British royal family, Prince Andrew. Jane Doe No. 3 was forced to have sexual relations with this prince when she was a minor in 3 separate geographical locations: in London, at Ghislaine Maxwell's apartment in New York, and on Epstein's private island in the US Virgin Islands, in brackets, in an orgy with numerous other underage girls. Epstein instructed Jane Doe No. 3 that she was to give the prince whatever he demanded and required Jane Doe No. 3 to report back to him on the details of the sexual abuse. Really appalling stuff. Again, allegations. And Andrew's response to this, so appalling allegations which have been made against him. A friend of Prince Andrew said, the US Federal Appeals Court said in 2019, these allegations should be treated with extreme caution. Allegations are not the same as facts, which is the essential premise on which justice works. Let's see if these allegations stand up, because precious few about the Duke do. Where's the proof? Now, obviously, everything that's said in that statement is, well, apart from that, well, in general, much of that statement is true. Allegations are not the same as facts. So you can't read someone's allegations and assume that's true. But if what you're saying is due process has to happen here, these are allegations, let's not get carried away. What do we have to remember? Prince Andrew, the FBI are desperate to speak to him. So if this guy cares about the difference between allegations and the findings of a jury or the findings of a judge or the findings of a proper investigation, then he should partake in that. What he's doing at the moment is saying, oh, these aren't allegations, no ruling has been made. But one of the reasons it's very difficult to make a ruling is because one of the key witnesses will not turn up to be questioned. And we know why, because obviously under scrutiny, Prince Andrew is a complete idiot. He melts. All of his excuses are appalling. And that's why they want to have his official people just do this all by letter writing, which the FBI obviously aren't interested in, because obviously they're not going to find out anything useful like that. But for him to be putting out, and obviously a friend of Prince Andrew, you can generally assume that Prince Andrew is aware of these people making these briefings. Obviously, I can't confirm that. But this idea that, oh, these are just allegations. If you're going to dismiss them, do it properly. Go there, speak to the FBI. And so the Duke of York urged US prosecutors to approve the deal, which would have meant Epstein avoiding more serious charges and having a shorter sentence, it is claimed. The documents claim in 2007, when Epstein faced a series of allegations of sexually abusing minors in Florida, the Queen's son put pressure on the government. It goes on, the paedophile was jailed for only 18 months in 2008. A friend of the Duke's told The Times the claim he had lobbied the US government was false. The unsealed testimony also has allegations that Epstein sent Prince Andrew, 60, an underage girl, believed to be Virginia Giuffre, for him to have sex with, something that could later be used to blackmail him. So here, that's where, potentially you're getting into some of the deeper explanations that people think are plausible, right? So this wasn't just a case of Jeffrey Epstein being a sexual predator, a pedophile, and getting away with it because he was rich and powerful. One of the reasons it seems likely that he was running this ring was to get compromat, to get footage, because there were video cameras everywhere on all of his islands that he could then blackmail people with. And for more context on that blackmail, this is from The Guardian. Epstein allegedly sexually trafficked the girl to powerful people to ingratiate himself with them for business, personal, political, and financial gain, as well as to obtain potential blackmail information. They included numerous prominent American politicians, powerful business executives, foreign presidents, a well-known prime minister, and other world leaders. Aaron, there's a lot to, I suppose, talk about there. One, I think this idea that, we titled this show, what was it? Convicted, accused, protected. And I think in ways you can see that all of the people we've talked about today have been protected in some way. Now, Prince Andrew, that could go way back. So potentially, you can go deep and say this investigation was cut off because of this person in a powerful place telling someone to cut it off, etc. You can go deep. But on a really basic level, I think the way he's being protected is that clearly you've got someone with a lot of questions to answer who's refusing to go and answer those questions. The FBI want to speak to him. And if you had someone like Boris Johnson or even Keir Starmer standing up in public and saying, look, this person should not show their face in public until they have responded to and done everything in their power to facilitate, to help an investigation proceed, which needs to, because a massive phenomenon, an enormous injustice has been done. And if any of us can do anything, to help it be resolved, we should do. And Prince Andrew is clearly someone who is in a position to help this investigation proceed. And for him to stand up in public life, I know he's resigned his official royal duties or whatever, but he hasn't resigned all of his, privileges. He's still a public figure. He should not be able to walk out in public until he has gone and answered those questions to the FBI. And I think Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer, everyone in positions of power should be saying that.
No, I totally agree. I think obviously Boris Johnson's not going to do it. He's the Prime Minister. And I suppose there is an argument to say he brings his office into disrepute. He has to be above. I obviously wouldn't agree with that. If Jeremy Corbyn was the Prime Minister or Keir Starmer was the Prime Minister, I wouldn't make that argument. But I can see why somebody in that role, the argument would be coherent and consistent to say they should do that. Keir Starmer absolutely should. Senior politicians, everybody bar basically the Prime Minister and maybe several, ministers of state. I think every other major politician with any kind of public profile whatsoever, you have to ask serious questions. How committed are they to the rule of law, to just outcomes, to helping victims, to solving crimes, if they won't even pressure Prince Andrew to answer some questions? And there's a broader context here. We saw about barely any crimes in this country are solved at all. That's collapsed really since austerity, since 2010. But even before that, wasn't particularly high. We had some news out, I think, was it late last week, early this week, about with CPS and a very low rate of actually solving crimes, actually, a success rate, so to speak, when it comes to sexual assault. What we're seeing with not just the case of Prince Andrew, and I'm not going to say whether he's guilty or not, but he's not even addressing the questions, but also what we see with this other story we previously touched upon with Conservative MPs and so on. What we see is that if you're wealthy and white, you can pretty much get away with it. You pretty much have immunity. And to a lesser extent, that applies obviously to Jeffrey Epstein. He was doing horrendous things, and yet, his sentence was pathetically small, insignificant really compared to the crimes he was guilty of. So you've got that on the one hand, and then you've got the Black Lives Matter movement on the other hand, where you have men of color who've literally not committed a crime, dying. And I think that really does draw attention to a profound inequality at the heart of our criminal justice systems, the ideological role of race in society. We've got a guy who wants to be questioned in relation to serious allegations of sexual assault, sex trafficking, etc. Somebody's died as a result of it as well, Jeffrey Epstein. It's important to say that's a big, big case. Nobody in public life is saying, oh, maybe he should go and talk to the FBI, including Keir Starmer. This guy's a former director of public prosecutions. Is it the case that, oh, yes, we take solving crime very seriously. We take sexual assault very seriously and answering to the authorities and taking responsibility for your action. All this stuff that these 40, 50, 60-year-old men love to proselytize and pontificate to the public as if they were children. That seemingly doesn't apply to one of Her Majesty's sons. Why?
Well, either why, because powerful people get away with stuff, or enough people have compromise on each other. I mean, that's part of the whole, or potentially part of the whole story, that the reason they get away with it isn't just because they're in positions of power and privilege, but the whole racket was about making yourself immune to scrutiny because you have dirt on each other. Grim stuff. If you are new viewers to this show, make sure you hit the subscribe button. And even if you're already subscribed, maybe hit that bell, because some people aren't getting notifications every time we go live. I'm going to go to a comment from the Black Angel with £50. Thank you. That's very kind. You guys do amazing work. Can you please post each segment separately as well, though, please? It's much easier to send to people, especially those that disagree, if it's in the individual segments. I'll tell you what we normally do is we don't do the first bits in segments, because you come that's what you watch first anyway. Normally we'll choose one segment from each show and we'll put it out, but maybe we could start putting out more. It'll just mean Fox is busier.
Can't hurt.
You what?
It can't hurt. I mean, maybe we should try it.
Yeah. We're going to go on
the audience wants.
We're going to go on to our next story. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Aaron. Next story. This weekend, Trump raised the specter of a ban on the social media platform TikTok.
We're looking at TikTok. We may be banning TikTok. We may be doing some other things. There are a couple of options, but a lot of things are happening. So we'll see what happens. But we are looking at a lot of alternatives with respect to TikTok.
So he left room for doubt when speaking to reporters on Air Force One. So then, instead of saying we're looking at a lot of options, he said, as far as TikTok is concerned, we're banning them from the United States. So I suppose no ambiguity there. The political incentives for such a move are obvious. He's about to fight a presidential campaign on the main issues of the day, the economy and coronavirus. It's going appallingly for him. He is tanking. He wants to change the subject. And what better way to change the subject than to point at some country that you can make out to be an enemy and a threat. Unfortunately, he's also getting very little opposition on this point from his political opponents. This is Chuck Schumer, the Democrats' leader in the Senate, speaking on Sunday.
I have been very opposed to TikTok. I was one of the first to expose the Chinese links. And I have urged that TikTok be closed down in America. There's a new proposal. Mnuchin and Meadows brought it up yesterday, to have Microsoft take it over. There are some questions that have to be answered. How will the data be stored and secured? Will the Chinese have links into TikTok? So before I would be for such a merger, I'd have to get some answers to these questions.
I love the way he's exposed the Chinese links of TikTok. It's a Chinese company. Everyone knew that. He just read the New York Times and then tweeted about it. Who knows what he's talking about? Anyway, I mean, with Aaron, I'll talk a bit about the politicking of this in the United States. But first of all, I wanted to know the actual facts, not just, I suppose, whatever Donald Trump and Chuck Schumer are spouting. So earlier today, I spoke to Yuan Yang, who is the FT's Beijing Deputy Bureau Chief and also a tech correspondent. So the perfect person to speak to on this topic. So I started by asking her whether TikTok does pose any genuine security threat to users in the United States.
So some US politicians have argued that TikTok could be spying on its users' data. Now, they haven't presented any evidence to show that this could be the case. So right now it's completely hypothetical. All the evidence that we do know so far of how TikTok, the app, works is that, yes, it takes user data and it siphons off huge amounts of user data. But that isn't so different to what existing US social media apps like Twitter, like Facebook already do. And that is simply the model of how social media apps monetize user data by selling it to advertisers, or as Shoshana Zuboff calls it, surveillance capitalism. That's the widespread model. Now, the added concern is, of course, for a Chinese company that US users or US politicians fear that China, if it got its hands on this data, could be using it for other nefarious means. So far, that is pure speculation. I think that rather than being a national security concern, with evidence back that up, TikTok is instead being used as more of a political football to be kicked around.
I mean, the other argument I've heard, which I didn't find that convincing, I have to admit, was that they can control the algorithm. So the idea is you could have this Chinese company that's showing people, I suppose, anti-American propaganda and hiding posts about the Uyghurs, for example. I mean, again, Is there any evidence for that at all?
There is grounds for concern about Chinese censorship partly because China censors so much data, so much content within its own borders. So Douyin, which is the Chinese internal equivalent of TikTok and was the kind of predecessor to TikTok, does huge amounts of censorship on everything from the Uyghur mass concentration camps in Xinjiang to the dissidents that have been locked up by the government, to Hong Kong independence, on a huge range of political themes. Now, ByteDance say that they have separated out the non-China content moderation from the China content moderation. And we haven't seen any obvious and clear examples of political censorship on the app. There is the possibility that the algorithm could be tweaked and changed in a disinformation campaign, for example, to try and change the way that US voters turn out. That hasn't been shown to be the case so far. And partly because the app's users are so young and usually are teenagers below voting age, I don't think it's as big a concern as the kind of clear disinformation campaigns that we can get on Twitter, which Twitter has also named and shamed, coming from China, coming from Russia, that already exist.
We've already seen now, just in the last year, the UK turning against Huawei, America sort of constantly expanding the list of companies it doesn't want to operate in the United States. Is this a serious problem for the Chinese economy, or, I suppose, is it big enough to just go it alone at this point?
I think Huawei and TikTok are very different when it comes to the impact on China's development. Huawei is much more important. It's a company that's built China's telecoms infrastructure. It's enabled the mobile revolution. It's built out all the internet coverage across vast swathes of China, including rural parts of China that previously had no internet coverage. And because it's a manufacturing company, it makes smartphones, it makes telecoms masts. It also indirectly employs lots of factory workers. Now, ByteDance and TikTok is in a very different situation. They are not actually making that much profit outside of China because they're still in the expansion phase of this new tech startup that's trying to gain users. They employ not that many people compared to a manufacturing company. They employ predominantly elite graduate students in big cities. So as a software company, they have much of a smaller impact on China's economy. Now, there is a class of people within China that will be affected by the threatened ban and by this potential sale. And those are going to be the young entrepreneurs, often who have been educated abroad, who've been sold this idea that they too can be international citizens, that they can play on a level playing field with their American counterparts. And culturally speaking, those kinds of young Chinese entrepreneurs are going to be much more similar to their Silicon Valley counterparts than to any other part of China's political class. They're going to be born after the 70s or after the 80s, the younger generation of entrepreneurs, and they will be very disappointed. But they are not President Xi and the Communist Party's main audience for its policies. The Communist Party still has its biggest groundswell of support among rural farmers, among people who have seen their livelihoods changed over the last few decades by the party, and increasingly is facing more discontent from this elite class, from the university-educated groups in China. So although that group of entrepreneurs is going to be disappointed, and I think they would quite rightfully feel a grievance about the US closing its doors to them, they're not the major concern of the Communist Party yet.
That was Yuan Yang, Deputy Beijing Bureau Chief for the FT, speaking to me from Beijing earlier today. I thought that point at the end about how sort of America banning TikTok is going to affect kind of middle class Silicon Valley type people in China, but President Xi's sort of solid support, which is in rural areas, and the working class is not going to be particularly fussed by any of this. Aaron, I want to go to you sort of to talk about the politics of this in the West, I suppose, because what you're seeing in the United States is there's complete bipartisan consensus on the idea of being really hawkish about China. So you saw at the beginning that, Donald Trump was trying to target Biden, seeing a weakness for him is that potentially he's soft on China. Now Biden doing adverts sort of saying that actually, no, Donald Trump is soft on China. There's this huge race to be toughest. Yeah. Who can be toughest on China? And it seems like, I don't know where it really ends. I can understand why they're all doing it. I can understand why Joe Biden and the Democrats are trying to close down any wedge issue they think Donald Trump might be able to find to win a new presidential term. But it also seems incredibly dangerous.
Well, lots of this doesn't make sense. There's a story out a few days ago in The Guardian about the Five Eyes network, which is Britain, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the United States, which is effectively a signal intelligence network, a spying network. They share lots of sort of surveillance data. Primarily the Americans and the British are generating that, obviously. They were saying this could be expanded to a kind of some kind of trade area. There'll be a pooling of resources because obviously people are saying, people are very keen to boycott China until they recognize the fact that it's got 90% of the world's known deposits of rare earth minerals. Or the fact that, is Australia really going to say goodbye to China when its number one economic market, its number one trade partner is China? After 2008, without the export of primary mineral resources to mainland China, the Australian economy would have been in the gutter. And so it's a really strange moment. And it's kind of unique in the last several hundred years in that for many countries, their primary military partner is the United States, right? For Australia, its primary military partner is the United States. However, its primary economic partner is China. And what this is doing is actually drawing out a really difficult contradiction there. Now, for somewhere like Britain, it's not such a big problem. I mean, we're in the North Atlantic. But for Australia, for Canada to an extent, for New Zealand, for pretty much all of Asia, for many European countries, for Eastern European countries, for Iran, the Middle East, Central Asia, it's pretty clear what the center of economic gravity is for them. Anybody that's exporting mineral resources from copper in Chile to, Central African Republic and bauxite, or Australia, they're looking to China. They're not going to sever economic ties with China. Then when it comes to social networks, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, the data from this is going to be powering the deep learning tools of the next 10, 20 years, basic artificial intelligence. And if we look at it, it's a cliche, but it's true. We look at data like oil. It's a hugely valuable resource. Where is this data coming from? It's coming from, like I say, Google, YouTube, Facebook. That's where real value is going to be accumulated over the next couple of decades because it's what's going to power artificial intelligence, these deep learning, machine learning tools and technologies. Now, you need large numbers of people to have an effective AI industry, which means that fundamentally in the 21st century, the two big AI superpowers will be the United States and China, because they don't just have the technology, the capital, the know-how, which both do. They also have huge data sets, right? They have huge domestic consumer markets. Now, China has 1.3 billion people. The US has 300 million people. I don't think the US is going to win this game if it tries to isolate China with its big domestic market of 1.3 billion people. It's growing. Consumer demand is still increasing. It's still a growing market. Maybe a year ago, this might have made some sense, but now when America's economy is going into the gutter, when sort of Anglo-American political leadership is falling away, China, people are saying China will be the world's largest economy by 2030. On price purchasing parity, it already is. But on nominal GDP, people are saying by 2030. COVID might accelerate that by 5 years. And so it's not such a simple assumption that Australia will just dismiss China and plump for, the Anglo countries when it comes to both military and economic relations. That's not necessarily going to be priced in. And if they do it, there's going to have major consequences for 5-10 years, which I would submit would probably generate a domestic political kickback. So it's a really big moment. The big development of the last 400 or 500 years, the biggest development, really, certainly for the last 200, 300 years, and because we're living in it, we don't think about it, is the rise of China as a political power, but also as a military and maritime power. It wasn't that, it's never been that before. The idea of China having global military reach, it's never had that before. It never wanted it before. And so these are really, really unprecedented times. And I think for America, it's not just about political leadership, economic leadership, and military leadership. It's also for that technological leadership. And the story of TikTok is how all of this intersects and dovetails.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a super interesting story as we move forward. We're about to go on to our last story of the evening. Before we do that, if you're enjoying the show, as you know, Novara Media is only possible because of the support of our kind donors. So if you are already donating the equivalent of 1 hour's wage a month, thank you so much. You make this possible. If not, please go to novaramedia.com/support. The Sunday Times broke an explosive story yesterday about rogue SAS execution squads operating in Afghanistan. So the story was based on emails which were recently revealed by the British High Court in a case the army were taken to court. They show special forces commanders were highly concerned about the killing of 33 people in the space of 3 months during night raids on their homes. So the details are really horrific, actually. So the raids took place in 2011, but emails relating to them are only being revealed now. That's due to a High Court challenge by Saifullah Yar, who lost multiple family members at the hands of Britain's SAS, so the Special Forces. The emails support allegations, so the leaked emails support allegations that a rogue SAS unit killed 33 men on 11 raids in 2011. So in these circumstances, it looks like war crimes were committed, and in each case, it's alleged they would raid a house, force a man of that household to go into the house, sort of ostensibly to clear the house for a search. But then what they would do is shoot the person in the back, allegedly, shoot the man in the back of the head, often with many bullet wounds, and then put a gun or a grenade next to them and claim that they killed them in self-defense. Really appalling. And what these emails show, so this was alleged by people who were there, by Afghans who were there, and now it has been corroborated by these emails. Really interesting case, really dark case. To discuss the details and the significance, what this tells us about Britain's armed forces and their SAS, I'm delighted to be joined by Declassified's Phil Miller. First question, we're going to look at some of these emails in a moment, but first I want you to sort of contextualize what's going on here. So I suppose Britain was at war with Afghanistan, so probably most of our audience won't be surprised that British soldiers killed Afghans, right? So I want you to sort of contextualize, to explain what's different, what's specific, what's sort of why we're hearing about these cases 9 years later, and what is sort of especially outrageous about what we're reading about here.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting about this case is it involves Britain's special forces, who are supposed to be the best of the best, our best trained, our most elite soldiers. And if they're making mistakes like this, if this turns out to be true, then that raises questions about what the rest of the army is up to as well. And also, the special forces are among the most secretive parts of the military. And part of that secrecy is supposedly to protect national security. But if actually what they're doing is killing civilians, that actually makes our national security worse, because we're going to create more people who resent the UK because we've killed their family members without any justification. So I think that those are some reasons why this case is of particular interest, but also the fact it's taken so long. I mean, I think the Sunday Times started reporting this back in 2017, and gradually more and more evidence has come to light. And now the family appear to have taken the Ministry of Defence to the High Court. I think they're judicially reviewing the decision of the military police not to prosecute. But I need to speak to the family's lawyer in more detail to be sure of that. But this is a real issue with Britain's special forces. It's just the lack of accountability. So last week with the Russia reports, Parliament's Intelligence Committee was very much in the news. So that committee in Parliament can scrutinise MI5 and MI6, but it can't scrutinise the special forces. And there is a defence committee in Parliament as well, but the defence committee can't scrutinise the special forces. So they're not subject to any parliamentary scrutiny, and they're also not subject to the Freedom of Information Act. So the only time that we really find out about when something's gone wrong is either when one of the victims' families on the other side of the world is somehow able to find a lawyer and take them to court in the UK, or there's an inquest because one of the British personnel has died, either in a training accident, or there was a case in Syria of friendly fire that I reported last year. and then it goes through the coroner's court, and then the public is allowed to know some details of what's gone on. But I mean, this is a thing. Britain's involved in so many different covert wars now around the world. Afghanistan is just one of them. And we have really no oversight mechanism at all to find out what's going on. So this is a very rare glimpse into some of these very sinister operations and what senior commanders fear may have gone wrong.
And I mean, I want to get up some of the emails actually, because what you can see from them is that, you know, it was known 9 years ago that something was going horribly wrong, but it doesn't seem like any measures were taken to bring about justice until a High Court judge ruled that that was, you know, going to be forced upon the SAS and the British Army. And that was because, as you say, the bravery of someone who managed against all odds to fight a claim from Afghanistan because his family were killed. Let's get up some of these emails. So again, these are from 2011. And this is from a troop sergeant, so he's someone high up in the SAS. He asks, can you send the operation summary and storyboard as an attachment, as we don't have access to the drives? Is this about the latest massacre? I've heard a couple of rumors. So these are people high up in the army. They've heard rumors about massacres, and then the reply is hard to believe. So this is from another senior officer. They write, basically, for what must be the 10th time in the last 2 weeks, when they sent a B, which is code for Afghan man, back into the A, which is code for house, to open the curtains, question mark, he reappeared with an AK-47. Then when they walked back into a different house with another man to open the curtains, he grabbed a grenade from behind a curtain and threw it at the CS, which is code for soldier or group of soldiers. Fortunately, it didn't go off. This is the 8th time this has happened. And finally, they shot a guy who was hiding in a bush who had a grenade in his hands. You couldn't make it up. And it's clear he thinks it has been made up. Right. So the idea he's saying, why would, and this is what, you know, all of the story that's being sort of put across in many of these emails and in the Sunday Times article is why would anyone sort of get out a gun from behind a curtain when there is a British soldier behind them with their gun trained on them? It's that would just be suicidal. Let's go to a couple more. So this is from another senior officer. Has anyone come up with an explanation as to why all the Taliban are beginning to adopt the previously unobserved tactics, techniques, and procedures of re-entering buildings during the search phase and coming back out with a weapon against overwhelming force and keeping grenades in their pockets? So what's going on here is people were aware quite early on that the reports that these SAS soldiers were writing, you know, didn't add up. It doesn't make sense to say we searched them, then we told one of the men in the household to go in and clear the space, and then they randomly sort of from behind a curtain drew an AK-47 out when they knew that there were loads of soldiers with their guns trained on them. And what you see here is soldiers saying this must be a new tactic from the Taliban because we've never seen anyone do this before. So they're clearly incredulous that this is going on. And again, we don't find out about it until 9 years later because of this court case. Now, I suppose a couple of questions. So I don't know if you know this actually, but do you know what happened to the SAS troops after these suspicions were raised? It's unclear from the Sunday Times piece.
So the Ministry of Defence say that it was investigated by the Royal Military Police on multiple occasions, but there are real issues with the Royal Military Police. Declassified did an article a few weeks ago about failings by the Royal Military Police in Iraq and how they deliberately sent underqualified investigators out at the start of the war. Which meant they didn't secure the scenes of the incidents properly, and it was impossible to do a proper investigation subsequently. So, I mean, there are calls for the Royal Military Police to be completely disbanded and a properly independent unit set up to investigate these serious allegations against the armed forces.
And I suppose, I mean, in a way, to be contrarian, I mean, what you could say about this is, even though, you know, justice was never done, this is showing that superiors are, I suppose, interested in running a rules-based, well, war. It's a slightly odd thing to say, but it does look like, I suppose another way of putting this, was this a rogue SAS troop? Was this a rogue SAS unit? Because it looks like their superiors were genuinely shocked by what was going on and didn't want to see it continue. So it doesn't seem like they were behaving in a way that is a rule for the SAS, but that these were in some way exceptional. Is that sort of an analysis you'd share?
I think because they're so opaque, it's really hard to say definitively either way. I mean, if you look throughout kind of post-war history, there are lots of examples in places like, well, in Iraq, for example. You know, if you listen to what Ben Griffin says in the film War School, he was in an SAS unit in Baghdad, and there were fears that they were becoming the secret police of Baghdad because they were handing people over who were then being tortured by the Americans. So I think, you know, that the SAS does have a much murkier history than the kind of popular myth of these kind of supermen mythologized by the Iranian embassy siege in the 1980s. And in places like Oman, there's so little transparency about what they've done. So I think obviously there are, in any large organization, there'll be differing views. There'll be some people who express concerns and other people who think this is just something that has to be done in the circumstances. But no, I think this is why we really need the Freedom of Information Act to be expanded to cover the special forces. And the National Union of Journalists did pass a motion supporting this call last year, but I haven't seen much action since then. But I think all journalists should want to know more about what our special forces are doing and to have more tools at their disposal as journalists. I think it would be a very popular call to reform the Freedom of Information Act to cover the special forces. And if you look at our closest allies as well, in the US, in Canada, in Australia, and New Zealand, you can make freedom of information requests. And I've done it myself to get information about what their special forces have done. But you just can't do it with the UK Special Forces. So it's a complete anomaly, and there's no good reason why it can't be done.
Do the government give a reason, or do they just sort of say, well, we just I suppose there's never been enough pressure for them to do it in a way?
Exactly. I mean, part of what's fascinating about this story is actually how rare it is for places like the Sunday Times and the BBC to actually break these stories and do investigative journalism that is critical or scrutinises the British military and the special forces and the intelligence agencies. Very often they don't, you know, they're not inclined to do this kind of reporting, and it means the military never faces calls for them to be accountable to Parliament or to freedom of information.
I want to bring in Aaron. What do you make of this story? What do you make of what Phil said? Did you know the SAS were sort of unique in not being subject to parliamentary scrutiny? You did?
I did.
Of course you did.
I did. Well, no, but that's only because I've read Phil's book, and I interviewed Ian Cobain a couple of weeks ago. So I'm kind of, 6 months ago I wouldn't, Michael, so don't feel guilty about it. I'm now very au fait with just how secretive the British state is. I think what Phil says is so spot on. 30, 40 years ago, you might not like their politics today, but the Observer, the Sunday Times, were doing world-class investigative journalism every week. And this story is so rare. It's just, you just don't see this kind of reporting anymore. I think on the Sunday, the big Observer front page story was Len McCluskey says something in an interview, which fair enough, actually, it was quite an interesting story. But, they don't really make the weather when it comes to news. The Sunday Times does more often than not, but often it's kind of parliamentary intrigue, he said, she said stuff. This is a really groundbreaking story, looking at what people have been doing in a war that is still ongoing, or an occupation that's still ongoing, and that has, helped reshape international relations in Central Asia. That's brilliant. And the Sunday Times doesn't do that much of it anymore. One reason is editorial ownership. There was a significant downsizing of the insights team once Rupert Murdoch bought the Sunday Times in the early 1980s. Another is, the digital environment. Less money and resources can be afforded to go into investigative journalism, which is why the work of people like Phil and others at Declassified is so important. And I think it is a really good substantive demand, actually, really good. We don't need to get ambiguous about this, to say that let's change freedom of information, let's apply it to special forces, and let's actually scrutinize them, a bit better when it comes to the fourth estate. But, also at the same time, and I think, to be honest, most of our audience know this, actually many conservative voters know this these days, an army of occupation will do things like this, right? It's inevitable. The idea that they're these cold professionals, even if you wanted to be like that, even if you enter a theatre of operations like that, once you've seen friends and comrades lose an arm, lose a leg, you're shot at every day, you're getting PTSD, you miss your loved ones, you're going to start behaving very erratically, long-term sleep deprivation. That we know, for instance, that the refreshing of soldiers in Afghanistan and in Iraq wasn't what it should have been, both for the Brits and for the United States. So, even if you believe, and I don't believe it, that these people could go into these theatres of operation and act professionally, I don't think armies of occupation generally act professionally. I think they were put under such conditions where that just clearly was never going to happen. And I think it really, again, for us, it's so strange in 2020. But in 2003, 2004, 2005, looking back, it's almost like Tony Blair, George W. Bush, they're very complicit, pliable, obsequious media. It seems like a different universe to think that this would end any other way than it did. And so I think, the teeth of this story aren't so sharp because we're kind of expecting these stories. But nevertheless, as Phil says, we need to get more of this from our media. They don't have the resources. They certainly don't have the ownership to get these stories out there as often as they should. Because believe me, there are many, 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 many more stories like this. This is not unique. It's not about, a few bad apples. There are huge numbers of stories of public interest from both Iraq and Afghanistan we'll never hear about.
Phil, final comments before we end. I suppose it's interesting, isn't it? Because the Insight team in the Sunday Times does, most Sundays report something that's genuinely interesting, but it does seem to be kind of alone in terms of the mainstream press. And it is also owned by Murdoch. So it's kind of a bit of a puzzle. But I don't know what your analysis of where sort of mainstream journalism or investigative journalism is on British foreign policy and scrutinizing the state, and why it just seems to come out once a week from a News International paper.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a glitch in the matrix that the Sunday Times seems to have got their teeth into this, and they're willing to publish it. But I think that, like Aaron said, there's so many things that happen in Iraq and Afghanistan that we just won't know about, and in other places as well, like in Oman. Declassified's got a story coming out tomorrow about the SAS's role in India during the 1980s, during Margaret Thatcher's government, when they went out to give advice on raiding a Sikh holy site in Amritsar. And that resulted in a massacre by Indian troops subsequent to the SAS advice. This happened in 1984. I broke the story in 2014. And the story coming out tomorrow shows how the government have been continuing to try and cover up the extent of British involvement in that episode. So that's just another example. And again, India, we wouldn't really think at all that the SAS were fighting or were involved in a conflict in India in the last 30, 40 years. But the truth is that they have been, but it nearly never came to light at all.
Yeah, well, we'll look out for that tomorrow and keep up with the investigative work, because we need more than one article in the Sunday Times every 6 months to understand what's going on in British foreign policy. Phil Miller, thank you for joining us this evening. Aaron Bastani, always a pleasure.
Always my pleasure.
And thank you everyone for your super chats tonight. If you want to support us directly, then you know where to go. NavaraMedia.com/support. We'll be back, or I'll be back on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Aaron will be here tomorrow night for the Bastani Factor at 8 p.m. You've been watching Tisky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.